Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Debbie Foreman, and I'm the Educational Programs Coordinator for MS Focus. Before we start the webinar, I'd like to introduce you to this year's National MS Education and Awareness Month theme. The theme for 2025 is the whole picture, leading a better life with MS, using a holistic approach to your MS care with a focus on whole body health, collaborating with your healthcare team, and providing support within your MS community. And each year, MS Focus creates a toolkit that's centered around our yearly theme so that we can send it to thousands and thousands of individuals on our mailing list. If you are currently subscribed to our MS Focus magazine, then you should already have this in your mail. You should have received it, probably at least by this week, if not last week. So if you didn't get it, just respond to your registration email of this webinar and we can just add you to the mailing list. Let me just show you. This is what it's looking like. It's really cool and it's really very helpful. So anyway, now I'm really thrilled to introduce our speaker. So Phillip Rumrill, PhD, is a professor of counselor education and director of research in the Human Development Institute at the University of Kentucky. Phil has published and lectured widely on the employment concerns and experiences of Americans with MS, including 2 editions of his book, Employment Issues in Multiple Sclerosis. So I'm going to put the slides up, and then Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you. So hold on, let me just get it
Okay.
up.
Sure.
Let's see here. Go. I'm going to share your slides. Okay. And let's see. Okay, let me get this down. Okay. I see
Just
bio.
minimize that document, Debbie.
Yep. There you go. That
There you
should
go.
be good, right?
Yep.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's go to the first one. There we go.
Okay. Are you at the title slide?
Phil, I'm at the one that says multiple sclerosis, and then you have 4 items listed.
Oh, okay, good. That's the second slide. Okay, so we've gone by the title and that's all right. Just so we're on the same page. And Debbie, thank you for advancing the slides for me here today. More importantly, I want to thank everyone associated with MS Focus, Debbie and Bhavya, and all of your colleagues and all of you for the opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. It is afternoon where I am, and I know that some of you are joining this program synchronously in real time, and others will hear the recording at your leisure. But I send my warmest greetings and delighted to have the opportunity to be here with you all today. I am phoning in today, and so I don't know if Debbie is on the screen. I am not, so I am on the phone, and I'll be just letting Debbie know when to advance the slides as we go. I'm going to do a brief overview of MS, not that you all don't know what it is, but just to sort of get the foundations of my remarks today down and out there. Then I want to talk specifically about the employment concerns facing Americans with MS from research that we've done and from direct service projects that we've worked with over the years. We're going to invite you to ask questions at the end of my formal, or should say prepared remarks, and I'm glad to answer questions there. If there ends up not being a lot of questions and we have some extra time, I have also included from work that we've done over the years a list of about 15 of the most commonly asked questions about employment asked by people with MS themselves in our work with folks with MS in a variety of capacities. So I'd rather deal with your questions that you have as they occur to you, but if we've got time and want to entertain those are at the back of this presentation. And Debbie, I presume that you'll make these slides available to anybody who wants them.
I definitely will. They're going to have access to them forever and ever.
Excellent. Okay, well, no turning back after that. This is everything's permanent with the internet, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
Well, let's go ahead and jump in. And again, great to be with you all. You all know these, so I'll just click through these pretty significant, pretty quickly. You are either dealing with MS yourself, have some personal or familial connection to it. Perhaps you are working in the field of healthcare or rehabilitation. So these are things we already know, and we'll just get them down as a matter of record. We know that MS is one of the most common neurological disorders in the world. We know that MS is characterized by lesions that occur in the central nervous system, that is the brain and the spinal cord. We know that MS destroys the myelin sheath, and that's the fatty tissue that covers nerves, white matter tracts, particularly in the brain and along the spinal cord. The symptoms of MS are determined chiefly by the size and location of those lesions. Next slide, please, Deb. A list of symptoms, and again, if you're dealing with MS, you don't need this reminder, but fatigue, of course, is the most common accompaniment of MS, affects as many as 90% of folks with MS. And you'll recognize these, of course, from your work and from your experience. Difficulties with balance and coordination sometimes diminished physical capacity, including strength and stamina, numbness and tingling, particularly in the extremities, bowel and bladder dysfunction, certainly one of the, very personal effect of MS that can really intrude on various aspects of life. Bipolar disorder and other mental health concerns, spasticity, motor dysfunction of various kinds, cognitive impairment. We estimate that as many as 60% of folks with MS have some difficulty with some aspect of cognition, although general intelligence is very rarely affected by MS, so it's not a global situation, but in particular areas. Depression, anxiety is down there as well. Visual impairment, depending on where the lesions occur, particularly those that occur in the optic nerves or in the occipital lobe of the brain. Sexual dysfunction of various kinds, speech and language problems, chronic pain. The list can go on, and we know that symptoms can be unpredictable. They occur in constellation, and as the term multiple implies, folks with MS often are dealing with more than one of those symptoms. So MS can really intrude upon functioning in virtually every area of life. The next slide, it just talks about some things that we are learning about MS and stress. We know that MS, of course, is an often unpredictable, almost always intrusive, and can be stressful disease. We really believe that effective coping and stress management are very important to any kind of positive health outcome and quality of life in general. We know that unmanaged stress, some experts believe, can trigger relapses of MS and exacerbate symptoms that people are experiencing. And so therefore, mental health counseling and other psychosocial kinds of services are very important elements of a holistic rehabilitation plan. We've got to see how folks are adjusting psychologically and socially, and how the effects of MS then bear on their abilities to engage in their communities the way they wish to, and particularly with regard to employment. We go on to the next slide. I do a lot of work with folks with MS, but we also do research in cross-disability work, that is across the disability community with people with other kinds of disabilities. And there are a few things that make MS unique in terms of other chronic health conditions and other disabling conditions. And we just thought we'd throw a few of these out just to sort of, again, set the stage a little bit. One is the onset in early to middle adulthood. You know, we know that the peak incidence of initial symptoms in MS occurs somewhere around age 30. So this is a disease of people in young and middle adulthood. It can occur at any age, but it's usually during that particular time. Capricious disease process, the unpredictable nature of the condition. Now, other chronic illnesses are unpredictable as well, but MS certainly is characterized by sometimes people's inability to project how it's going to affect them over time. But we see the sex-linked aspect of MS and the high incidence among women. About 3/4 of people with MS worldwide are women. The presence of cognitive impairment, we talked about this before. Generally normal life expectancies. MS used to be thought of, you know, as a terminal disease, but with disease-modifying therapies and other advances in treatment, people with MS leading longer, more comfortable, and fuller lives really than ever before. We see this as a good thing because of the fact that people are experiencing MS across the age range. We have the full and wide range of career development issues that occur, and the unique impact that MS has on people's employment and career development really makes it another uniquely, let's say, interesting condition to think about and to consider. Debbie, are we good if we go on to the next slide, MS and employment?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. So a few things we know about MS and the employment situation. Studies we've done and others that our colleagues around the country and the world have done, we know that as many as 98% of all people with MS have employment history. That means they've worked at some point in the past, and this largely owes itself to the incidence of MS. It begins during early and middle adulthood. And if you think about symptoms manifesting themselves for the first time at around age 30, which it does for many people, most of us have begun to establish their careers already by then. So most 30-year-olds in society have worked at some point in the past. So this figure is not surprising. We know that 82% of people with MS in our most recent study were still working at the time they were diagnosed. However, as time and the illness progress, we see a really, we've referred to as a mass exodus from the labor force, and we've learned that only 25 to 40% of folks with MS retain their employment through to retirement age. And we know that the majority of folks with MS, more than half, are no longer working just 5 years after their diagnosis. Most recent study we saw a 59% jobless rate among adults with MS across the globe, and we see these figures somewhere around that 40% figure in study after study here in the United States. We'll go on to the next slide, Deb, if you don't mind.
Yep, it's there.
A little more on MS and employment. So think of it this way. We've got a well-qualified, capable, productive group of workers, most of whom have employment histories and extensive experience. Most are working, the vast majority are still working at the time of diagnosis. However, what we see is in the main, folks with MS tend to disengage from the labor force. And we've done a number of studies over the year and talked with a lot of people with MS, trying to determine why that is so. One of the things that we do in looking at this is we talk to the people with MS who have disengaged from the workforce and say, can we ask you some questions about your employment and your careers? And what we find is quite interesting. We find that 3/4 of all people with MS who are not currently employed left their jobs voluntarily. They made the choice to do it on their own. Now, we do hear that they get a little help in that decision sometimes from employers and coworkers and healthcare providers, perhaps, who suggest that they disengage from the workforce. But the notion that your employer finds out you've got MS and then it's like, you're fired summarily, that's not really how it works. Most people make the choice to leave the workforce. And yet at the same time, about 80% of unemployed people with MS believe they still have the ability to work. And 3/4 of those same unemployed people with MS say they would like to work. So what we have is this phenomenon of folks with MS. By these data, we've got the majority of people with MS are disengaging from the workforce, usually of their own choosing, in most cases before MS has rendered them unable to work, this is by their own reports. And then by virtue of that third bullet, 3/4 would like to work, we think the majority of folks with MS begin regretting that decision to disengage from the labor force because they say they'd like to go back to work. And what we found during the still ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is that half of all employed people with MS, this is not the folks who are unemployed, but all folks with MS who are employed in March of 2020 have experienced some interruption in their employment over the last five years. This makes people with MS 3 times more likely than the general population to disengage from the workforce during COVID. So we've got this qualified, capable, experienced group of workers disengaging from the workforce, wanting to get back into the labor force. COVID-19 threw a whole wrench into everything, and certainly we know that if you have an autoimmune condition or any pre-existing health condition, you didn't want to get COVID or long COVID on top of that. So the pandemic certainly hasn't helped and has complicated everyone's lives in many ways, but we want to continue figuring out ways, first of all, to help people with MS stay working as long as they wish to do so, but even when they do disengage, think about possibly coming back if and when they want to. We're not suggesting that it's up to us to decide when someone with MS ought to disengage from the labor force. We only want you and others with MS to make that decision for yourselves, to do it armed with all of the information about how people can succeed in the workforce. And if we can bring to bear what we know about the employment situation for folks with MS, including risk factors for job loss, including things we can do to help people succeed in their careers, even as they cope with this intrusive illness, then the likelihood that people make the best decision for them goes way up. And that's what we're all about. Debbie, can we go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
And this is from some research we've done. I won't bore you with the statistics, but these are known correlates of employment status, things that relate to whether someone with MS at any given point in time will be employed. Gender is one. We know that women are moderately more likely than men to disengage from the workforce following the MS diagnosis. We know that people with higher socioeconomic status, that's a higher level of education and higher income in the jobs that they had, are more likely to continue in employment than are people with lower socioeconomic status. Age is kind of an interesting one. We find that both younger and older workers with MS are more likely to be unemployed at any given time, and people in the middle age range tend to be more likely to be engaged in the workforce. What we think is if you pass through early adulthood and continue working with MS, you're likely to do that through the middle stages of your career. But when you're younger and you experience MS and you experience a severe progressive form in particular, you're likely to disengage at an earlier age. And of course, as people do get older, other health complications can set in. MS tends to become progressive over time for many, if not most people. So the older people get, the more physical and psychological challenges they may be having. So older workers, it's not surprising that they would tend to be out of the workforce as well. We know that the type of symptoms people are experiencing can predict employment status. We know that people who have significant mobility impairments, meaning that they use some kind of mobility aid like a scooter or a wheelchair or even a cane, are more likely to be unemployed than people for whom mobility impairment is not one of their symptoms. We know that people with MS who have cognitive impairment as part of the disease are about 4 times more likely to be unemployed than people with MS who do not experience cognitive impairment. Just for example, so as we see some of these symptoms, sometimes the symptom profile can determine whether one is likely to continue in employment or not. Course and severity, we talked about that. People with the primary or secondary progressive forms of MS, if your course is progressive, if you're dealing with more symptoms in number and more severe impact on your overall health, it stands to reason that you'd be less likely to stay employed over time. The type of job someone has at the time of diagnosis has a lot to do with whether they stay in the workforce or not. If you have the kind of job that doesn't require physical exertion because of the fatigue and stamina issues related to MS, you're going to be more likely to keep your job. If you have the autonomy in your workplace to determine your own accommodations and can implement those with the cooperation of your employer, we find that those folks tend to stay in the workplace. If people are able to have the flexibility to work at home or reschedule their work, they're more likely to stay on the job. But jobs that require people to work outside, jobs that require heavy lifting and extensive physical stamina, jobs that require people to work more than 40 hours per week, those are the jobs that can be really red flags for people disengaging from the workforce. Employer attitudes, when they're good, it's a protective factor against job loss. When the employer's attitude toward MS or toward accommodations for workers in general is negative, then outcomes are not as good. So maintaining a good relationship with your employer, certainly very important. Workplace discrimination, a very common and unfortunate phenomenon for people with MS in the workplace. Is kind of the ultimate behavioral manifestation of a negative attitude, right? Is out and out discrimination. And when that is present, it makes it very difficult for a person with MS to maintain their employment. Co-occurring long COVID sort of goes without saying why that would be, an issue. So with all of these on this slide, Debbie, there's a direction to the correlation, but the obverse is also true. So, for example, positive employer attitudes would predict a positive employment outcome. Negative employer attitudes would predict a risk for job loss. So these correlates are not really offered with any particular valence, but if you have any of these particular characteristics and where folks fall on these dimensions, sometimes it can create a profile about what kinds of services and support folks might need to either re-enter the workforce or to stay in it in the first place.
Very helpful information.
Debbie, I'm gonna catch my breath for just a moment. Take one drink of water. We're gonna go to the next slide. Is there anything, Debbie, that occurs to you, or you'd like to reflect on anything that I've said so far?
No, I really everything you said made so much sense. Really, I'm sure everybody that's attending is shaking their heads going, yeah, that's it. It all makes sense. Nothing in particular.
Okay, I'll certainly be interested to know whether these remarks, really resonate with folks' own experiences. And these are taken from research that we've done. We ran a program when I was at Kent State University in Ohio called the MS Employment Assistance Service. We provided a toll-free telephone and web-based email and internet-based career consultation to folks with MS, about 3,000 people with MS over a 10-year period. So this is drawn from people's own experiences and from research that that we've done. But I don't presume that what I'm saying reflects any individual person's experiences. Those are your own, and perhaps we'll have the chance to talk about those as well. And I don't mean to suggest that what's generally true for people with MS is necessarily true for any individual, because what is it that we say? If you know a person with MS, then you know one person with MS, right? Because
Right.
it affects everybody differently, and we honor and respect that.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. I call it opportunity knocks. I feel like I've been the kind of like the Grim Reaper here, giving all the bad news and the difficulties that folks experience. But we've got some things to work with here. What can we do to make sure that this qualified, capable, productive, experienced group of workers with MS who have so much to contribute to employers and to the national economy, what can we do to make sure that we're harnessing everything that folks with MS can bring to the table? And we've got some things going for us that I want to share with you, and I hope these resonate with your experiences as well. First, we've got the DMTs, disease-modifying therapies, right, and other treatment advances that are happening all the time. Haven't these really significantly moved the needle, on the disease experience for folks with MS? And I'd say particularly for folks with relapsing remitting forms of MS, I think that's pretty accurate, but we are better able to treat MS than we used to be. People leading more comfortable and more active lives really than ever before, and wanting to stay engaged in all aspects of community, including employment. I already preempted this one, but here we're talking about people with MS, next bullet, as an experienced and well-trained and productive labor resource for employers. And employers need you to enter, re-enter, and stay in the workforce now more than ever. And bear with me. Here's why we think so. Go on to the next slide. We know that 20 million new jobs have been created in the United States since March of 2020. This is during the COVID-19 pandemic and its unprecedented impact on global public health, on the economy in general. But we have created 20 million new jobs. Okay, the employment, the population ratio in the general population of Americans is 73% of all working age adults. All working age adults is 73% in our society. This is nearly an all-time high. So when we think about, and the employment to population ratio is actually the rate of people who are actually engaged in the workforce, okay? So 73% of working age people in America are working for pay right now. This is certainly a good thing and a great marker for the health of our overall economy. The unemployment rate, which is the percentage of people who are in the workforce who are receiving unemployment benefits, right, at any given time. That doesn't mean the jobless rate, that just means people receiving unemployment benefits, but it's 4.1% or so nationwide. This is nearly an all-time low. So we've got more people, engaged in the workforce than ever before, but we call this a full employment economy. And what that means generally is that most everyone who wants to work is already working. And so when employers have these openings from these 20 million folks, 20 million jobs that have been created, right? Employers have to find ways to recruit and accommodate and maintain every qualified and capable worker. So people who have tended to be disenfranchised from the labor force, including people with disabilities, and in particular, folks with MS, now need to be included to support the economy, and employers need these experienced and productive workers more than ever before. We also know that for every job opening that an employer is seeking to fill, for every 2 job openings that an employer wants to fill, there's only 1 available applicant in the national economy. So there are a lot of jobs sitting open without people to fill them. And what we need to do is make a better match and to let employers know that folks with MS who want to continue in the workforce and can contribute so much have the opportunity to do that. We find that employers do realize this, and we want to make sure that we can connect with folks with MS before they disengage from the workforce if possible. But even if they're out of the workforce and want to get back in, we want to talk about how this operates. Next slide, please, Deb. And so what do we find because of all this? Well, since the pandemic, we know that employers are really leaning in the right direction, having to do with workplace accommodations, including opportunities to work at home. And we don't have to argue with employers anymore about the benefits of helping people with disabilities stay in the workforce through workplace accommodations. Employers know what we know, and that is that 57% of all accommodations used by people with disabilities nationwide cost absolutely nothing to implement. And the average cost of the other 43% of accommodations that do bear a cost is only $517, okay? We talk with employers all the time, and they would tell us that their most costly personnel expense is not accommodations. It is lost productivity and turnover. And most employers would be willing to invest $517 in keeping a good, qualified, capable, experienced worker on the job over a period of time. Compared to having that job open and the lost productivity associated with that, this is a minimal and very effective accommodation. We also know that the most common form of accommodations used by people with MS, according to our friends at the Job Accommodation Network, and we'll talk about them in just a minute, are scheduling modifications and flexibility in the work location, okay? And these are usually done at no cost or low cost to the employer. So it's some common sense and some flexibility is what most people with MS are needing in the way of accommodation. We see that folks with MS are relatively easy to accommodate in the workforce. They're highly desirable workers because of the experience that they bring to bear. And we have a growing but understaffed economy. So we need to figure out ways to continue to make this match and to let people know that there's room for them in this burgeoning economy. And in fact, there's a great need for their services. We have some resources that can help in this regard as well. And I've included some links here. First, the Job Accommodation Network at West Virginia University, this terrific toll-free and online resource. If any questions you may have, individuals with MS can contact them, employers can, service providers, a tremendous repository of how to accommodate disability in the workplace. The ADA Center's National Network does similar kind of work implementing the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ONET website, sponsored by the United States Department of Labor, helps with interest assessments and labor market information if you want to find out what the outlook is for a job in your particular area. The State Federal Vocational Rehabilitation Program that's available in all 50 states and every U.S. territory, free of charge, provides services and support to folks with disabilities, including MS, and can help with job training, job development, finding a job, keeping a job, a terrific resource there as well. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Debbie, here's another thing we have going for us, and this is the 35th birthday of the Americans with Disabilities Act this year. ADA is the most comprehensive civil rights law for people with disabilities ever passed in the history of the world. That's not hyperbole, it's just a fact. It was signed into law with bipartisan congressional support. And Debbie, how often does that happen nowadays? Bipartisan congressional support. That isn't a word we hear very often, unfortunately, but signed into law by President George H.W. Bush in 1990. It passed in the U.S. Senate 76-8 and was a unanimous voice vote in the House of Representatives. So really strong congressional and executive branch support. The ADA took initial effect in 1992. It takes a couple of years to get the regulations going, and then full effect in 1994. And then the ADA Amendments Act, signed by Mr. Bush Sr.'s son, George W. Bush, in 2008. This law took effect in 2009. And together, these laws prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities and require accommodations that help people with disabilities continue in the workforce. And not just in employment, it has to do with access to government services, to privately held public accommodations like restaurants and shopping malls, communications systems as well. So ADA is a big deal, and we have this on our side. You go to the next slide just very quickly, the 5 titles of the ADA. We won't belabor this, but the first Title I is employment, and that's no accident. That's how important employment is to people's livelihoods and quality of life. Public services, which are government-funded services like municipal and state governments, libraries, town halls, correctional facilities, schools, state colleges and universities, publicly operated community colleges. Public accommodations, these are privately held businesses that are open to the public, including Greyhound Bus, include shopping malls, movie theaters, as we had talked about before. Communication systems, particularly telephone relay systems for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and now all kinds of information on web accessibility for the disability community. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, enforces Title I of the ADA, and the United States Department of Justice and the Federal Communications Commission enforce the other titles. So this is just overview information regarding this very important law that is built and continues to provide equal access in all aspects of society for people with disabilities. We'll go to the next slide, please, Debbie. And here we've got the slide says survey says, and these are the top 10 employment-related concerns of people with MS over the past 25 years or so. This is from research that we've done, as well as our direct service work, as I mentioned. These are really the highlights that we want to commend to your attention. And they're numbered, but they're not in priority order necessarily. These are just the top 10 that keep showing up over and over. Number one, first one, managing health, work, and community participation during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this has come up over and over. And how do you manage and navigate those things collectively in the middle of this just unprecedented global public health crisis that we're still, I don't want to say in the middle of, but it's still with us, isn't it? Telecommuting and home-based employment, and this has become even more prominent, of course, during the pandemic, but this was an issue for folks with MS. They, for a long time, have wanted to know about opportunities to work from home and telecommute, both as an accommodation and just as a way of doing their job because it's more convenient to do it that way. Health insurance coverage and access to health care. Employment is a conduit to health insurance and therefore to health care. And the better health care we receive, the healthier we are, the better able we are to work. So there's this reciprocal relationship between health employment that's mediated by health insurance coverage and access to health care. And folks with MS want to know what they can do to maintain their, manage their symptoms, maintain their health, while they're looking to continue in their careers. Understanding long-term disability insurance and Social Security benefits. We see this issue arising all the time. Understanding what incentives and disincentives to work exist within disability benefits programs. Disability benefits are usually granted to folks who are considered to be too disabled to work. And so if your government or your insurance company says you're too disabled to work, how does that work if you decide you want to go back into the workplace? But someone said you're too disabled to work, and now you're wanting to take advantage of opportunities to go back into employment. And what is the impact of your benefits? Will you lose your government sponsored health insurance like Medicaid or Medicare? Will you lose the cash stipend if you go back to work? So understanding your benefits becomes very important in that decision. The legal protections under the ADA and other federal laws, such as the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Affordable Care Act, colloquially known as Obamacare, and other federal protections that are available to workers with disabilities. Do people know their rights? And some resources are available that we can talk either at the end of the program here or off air. My email will be on here as well. I can point you in the direction of some of those resources as well. So that's the first 5. Let's look at the second 5 of the top 10. Debbie, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Workplace discrimination, what to do about it, coworker and employer attitudes, how to identify unfair treatment if you are subject to it, how to prevent misunderstandings between workers and coworkers and employers before they get to the point of a discrimination complaint. But if you are experiencing unfair treatment, you do have recourse. And what is it that you can do about that? And what are your options there? Folks tell us they want to know about this. Disclosure of disability and making requests for reasonable accommodation. So if you need an accommodation in the workplace, the first step in that process, according to the ADA, is you have to let your employer know that you are a person with a disability. If you don't have a disability, you're not protected under the law. So you have to disclose that you are that you have a disability. And MS qualifies as a presumptive disability. If you have MS, you are automatically protected under the ADA. But when you go about making that disclosure, you are compromising sometimes your own right to privacy. Sometimes people will share too much information, or it will activate negative reactions or biases that people may have about MS or a lack of understanding. So some people are hesitant to disclose their disability, even if disclosing would entitle them to an accommodation. So that whole process becomes one that people want to know more about, and you really want to understand the risks and benefits of disclosure before you go and approach your employer to talk with them about your MS. Next one, access to transportation, to assistive technology of various kinds, to schedule modifications, other kinds of workplace accommodations. Are the circumstances in your life right so that you can succeed in employment? And if you're not able to transport yourself to work, are there ride sharing opportunities? Can we work on that and put those things in place? Do you have access and the opportunity to work from home? Do you need to modify your schedule in some way? Do you need to know about resources like the Job Accommodation Network and others? So getting the conditions for successful employment in place is a question that we hear an awful lot. Symptom management, addressing changes in your health status, positive changes for the good, changes for the not so good, just staying abreast of how MS is affecting you, becoming your own best expert on your health and therefore on your employment and your career development. And so making sure you're taking advantage of all healthcare, including mental health resources. You're arming yourself with information about MS. If you're inclined towards self-help and self-advocacy kinds of activities, you want to get involved in support groups. Do you know about resources from the MS Foundation? from our friends at the National MS Society and other organizations? Are we accessing information that can help to understand not only what MS is, but how to continue working if you choose to do so for as long as you choose to do so. And number 10, the availability of vocational rehabilitation services and other supports. We hear a lot from folks with MS. I'd like to get back into the workforce. I don't know how that would work. I don't know who's hiring. Is there any agency or organization that can help me in doing that and making those connections, which do exist in our communities and across the United States, and letting people know what those resources are and figuring out ways that will help them the most. So that's sort of a thumbnail sketch of the employment situation. It's the kinds of concerns that folks with MS are experiencing. I hope I have underscored that maintaining employment while coping with MS can be a complicated and challenging endeavor and enterprise. And we still have far too many folks with MS disengaging from the labor force and then wishing that they hadn't from their own reports. So we need to do a better job of helping people to continue as long as they wish to do so. But there is a tremendous opportunity before us and an extensive and valuable labor resource that people with MS bring to the table. Employers do, I think, do realize that. But I think people with MS often don't realize and don't see themselves in an employment sort of context once they have disengaged from the workforce. So here we think early intervention is important. If we can start talking with folks early on in the disease process before folks have disengaged, but even if you have disengaged, there are opportunities to get back into the workforce. So there are challenges associated with this, but there are a lot of opportunities, and employers need you if you want to work and feel that you're able to do that. I think you may find that there'd be a lot more opportunities available to you than you might think, owing to everything that we've been talking about so far. So Debbie, that's sort of my canned remarks and what I wanted to get across and sort of get out on the table. I'm wondering if there might be any questions. I guess we're not going to do the chat, but if people wanted to unmute or ask particular questions, I'd be happy to hang around until our time runs out today.
Yes, thanks, Phil. That was a lot of information. Holy moly. I'm like, my head is filled. I can't wait to be able to go through this slowly afterwards once it goes onto YouTube and be able to really, you gave us such great information. So,
for the opportunity.
yeah, thank you for that. So, I'm going to encourage, we do have some questions already in the Q&A and in the chat. So
Sure.
I'm going to go ahead and ask those. Let's stop sharing your screen. Okay. And I'm going to take myself off of.
Debbie, while you're doing that, may I
Yep.
just say that my email address at the very end of the slides here, I have a wrap-up frame, and it does have my email. I am happy to talk. I'll give brief answers and direct answers here, but if we need to talk more, because so many of these responses are tied to people's unique circumstances, I would be delighted to talk with people off air if they need more information than a brief response here. So I'll tend to be brief here, but please contact me, and I'd love to engage with you in more detail if necessary.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to get myself on. Oh, there you go. Take me off of video. Off. Okay. Hi there. So let me see what's in here. We
All right.
have Jenna says, hello. I missed the statistic of how many years did a person live with their MS diagnosis before leaving the workforce? Was it 5 or longer? Thank you.
Yeah, we don't have the actual figure on average what that works to, Jenna. That's a great point. What we know is that about half of all people with MS tend to leave their job. If you're going to leave your job early, you're going to do it within the first 5 years of diagnosis. And so we see early on in the disease process, about half of all people with MS are disengaging from the workforce. Half of those who were employed. So the employment rate at diagnosis is around 80%, and the employment rate 5 years later is somewhere around 40%.
Thank you. So also for those people that haven't joined us before that'd like to know how to submit their questions, you just have to, I'm going to suggest putting them in the Q&A area rather than the chat area. It's easier for us to navigate just one versus them in both different places. We'll save that for the
Sure.
Facebook people. So if you have a question and you'd like to ask Phil directly, you can just, raise your hand and I can see that and we can unmute you so you can do that. And if you're on the phone, just hit *9. So now that we did that, let's go to the next one. So this person's age 51, received MS diagnosis. What is your experience, Phil, that leads to a possible disability and at what age? Currently, they have no symptoms, but a lesion on their brain, particular in the area OS, MS.
Yes. Now, when you, I presume this person is asking about possible disability, meaning that you'd be deemed eligible for disability benefits. If that's what you're referring to, you would necessarily have to be experiencing some symptoms. It sounds like that this person's having fairly mild symptoms or no symptoms. Did I understand that correct?
Yeah. No symptoms, but they do know they have a lesion on the brain.
Well, and a few things that we do know. I'm not a neurologist, and I don't want to play one here on TV. I'm a rehabilitation counselor by training, but I think there is some evidence to suggest that how the disease affects you during the early stages of the disease of MS can set the stage for the future. So if your symptoms are minimal, you're getting good medication and it's alleviating those symptoms, you're not experiencing a lot of effects there, now's not the time to be thinking about disability. And I think there's great reason for optimism that if you're feeling healthy now and your symptoms are being controlled, you always want to hope for the best and yet plan for the worst, right? So we want to do everything we can to maintain our health, to keep our symptoms down, to manage them when they do occur, and figure out ways to manage the symptoms that do come up within the context of the work of staying in the workforce, if that's what you're wanting to do. It's only when your symptoms make it so you're no longer able to work that you want to start thinking about disability benefits. And this isn't just my own bias that people should work as long as they wish to, although I think most of us would agree with this. It's a practical matter because your short and long-term disability insurance will not kick in unless you can tie your symptoms directly to your difficulties in working. And Social Security disability insurance is going to, in determining whether your MS has made it so you can no longer work, they're going to want to see, they'll only deal with present symptoms, not what might happen in the future. So for this caller, I would say the time for disability is certainly not now. And as long as the symptoms are being managed, fairly effectively, we want to be thinking ahead in that regard. There's really no way to predict, unfortunately, though, what that pattern of symptoms may be. What I would say is that once symptoms do start becoming manifest, if that's the case, then we want to look at issues related to accommodations, contact folks, your neurologist, whoever's treating your MS is the place to start there for sure. And sharing with your healthcare providers what your job requires you to do, and then monitoring whether your MS is affecting your ability to do that. I would be happy to talk in more depth and provide some more resources for the contingency, the what if into the future. But I'm so glad to hear that this person's symptoms are minimal at that point, at this point, and we want to do everything we can to continue those moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. So this person says, I work in the medical field and I am curious if I am required to disclose my MS to my medical board licensing board.
Yeah, you are certainly not required to disclose in most cases, you're not required to disclose your diagnosis of MS. It's not the diagnosis that matters, it is the symptoms. If the symptoms of your MS affect your ability to perform the usual and customary functions of whatever profession you're in that is subject to the license, you are obligated to let your employer know that, and to let them know if you need any accommodations on your particular for your particular job. But you don't have to disclose anything about your health condition unless it is affecting your ability to do some part of the job. And it isn't the diagnostic information that becomes important, it's the functional information about your symptoms themselves. So if you're having difficulties with symptoms, then a conversation or a consideration has to be made about whether you're still able to do those functions. There's a liability issue, there's a safety issue, but it's not about the diagnosis. Generally speaking, you only have to disclose your MS if it affects your ability to do the job such that you need accommodations to perform the job effectively and safely. What I would do, though, is I would inquire to the particular board that oversees your own profession, whatever it might be, if it's a nursing license or a physical therapy license or a physician's license. I would inquire to them, and I would not inquire by name. I would inquire hypothetically, and I would say, let's say a person has this condition. Would they have to disclose in this way? And what are the laws? Those can vary from state to state, but generally speaking, we're very protective of people's rights to privacy, and it's the diagnostic information that becomes very important. I want to just add one thing about the fact that this person works in a healthcare context. Often employers in healthcare intrude on workers' privacy in ways that other employers do not, because we're in the business of diagnosing people and treating them based on what issues they're having. So we think we understand disability, we understand health. Often your supervisor is a medical or healthcare professional as well, and they want to use the same, parlance about the diagnosis as we would with our patients. But that's not the role. When you're an employer of someone, you have different kinds of standards in terms of what you can know about the person's circumstances. So there's a tendency for healthcare employers to basically over-elicit disability-related information from workers. And there's also a tendency for healthcare workers who have disabilities to over-disclose, if that makes any sense. And I'd be glad to talk with this listener through email or perhaps by phone about their own individual circumstance as well. I'd like to know more about the situation, because if this question comes up in my work with other folks who may have a license, it might help me to help the next person as well. So I really appreciate this question.
Great answer. Carla's asking that with the return to office initiatives, how can we bring up accommodations to work from home when interviewing for a new job?
Yeah, that's, you really do want to do your homework and find out if the job you're applying for is an in-person one with the return to office focus, and you know that going in, you sometimes do want to take that into consideration when applying for the job. The employer doesn't have to grant you the accommodation that you request necessarily. It is up to them which accommodations they will, provide and which ones they won't. But for a long time during the pandemic, working at home was not a disability-related accommodation. It was an accommodation for millions of workers, right? Because many of us had to work from home, not because of disability, but because society was closed. Now employers are calling people back into the in-person kind of situation. So now what we're finding with folks with MS and other disabilities, the choice or the desire to work from home has come back to becoming a disability-related accommodation, because the employer says, we're calling everyone back. The person with MS says, I'll be more productive if I can continue to work at home. So where you used to let me work at home just because it was more convenient, now I'm asking you to do this as an accommodation for my MS. So we're finding that sometimes people have to take an extra step in getting that accommodation in place. Carla, you also bring up a great point about when is it a good time to ask for an accommodation, and talking about the accommodation, say during the interview or during the initial hiring stages. We all know that it's different to ask for an accommodation as an applicant, right, for a job than it is if you're an incumbent employee. If you're on the job for a while, you've built the bond with the employer, they know you, they value you, they're going to have a different response to an accommodation request than they might if you're just getting started. So you do have to take that into consideration about the timing of the request and when that offer is made. But you don't want to accept a job that has working conditions like working in person if that's simply not something you're going to be able to do. At the point you conclude that, you really do want to put that out on the table and make that request. Our friends at the Job Accommodation Network, Carla, and we have a link for them, would have tons of information on this disclosure decision, the particular accommodation, how to frame it. And again, I'd be happy to talk with you off air if you wanted to pursue this with some more specifics about your own case. But this is it's a great question that I think has implications for a lot of people. So thanks for bringing it up.
And thanks, Phil. We do have a couple more questions, and I don't know if you have time to go beyond the 5 o'clock marker, do you? Well, okay, so let's try to do that. You let me know if you have to leave, and we'll stop. So Kim has Kim has a couple concerns. She said that she has several doctor's appointments and physical therapy appointments coming up. How do I arrange that time off with my employer? But she says she has a very stressful job. So should she look into disability or ask for accommodations?
Kim, I'm always going to say, don't inquire about disability until you've considered accommodations. And accommodations for stress are totally valid considerations, particularly if your MS makes you particularly vulnerable to stress in terms of a stressful job, and that can affect your mental health, perhaps even your own, exacerbations of symptoms, things of that nature. So attend to that. We always want to think about disability. Now, remember, I'm a rehabilitation counselor, so I'm going to tell you that going out of the workforce on disability should be a last resort as long as you want to continue working. So you always consider the accommodation first. Accommodation is an antidote to having to go out on disability. So there's a sequence there. And I'd be glad to point you in some direction about how we can look at accommodations for stress and other aspects of the job. You mentioned time off for medical appointments, and I think this is very important. Most workers have sick and paid time off and unpaid time off. They have a variety of different leave options for things like appointments that occur, during the day. There's no reason, just because you happen to have MS, that you should have to attribute any of those meetings or appointments you have to a diagnosis of MS of any kind. If you've got personal time, if you can take time off and have flexibility in your schedule, you need an hour before lunch, but you'll make up for it after work, those kinds of things. Anytime you can take time off and don't have to assign it to your MS, so you just say, I have a doctor's appointment. Don't engage the employers, don't engage their curiosity that it has to do with your MS, or, oh, wow, maybe you've requested you requested time off for a doctor's appointment. Oh, maybe you're having an exacerbation of MS. I say keep that off the table, and if your employer will give you the time off as they would for anyone else, and they don't require everybody else to share why they're going to the doctor, you shouldn't have to either. And this sort of speaks to the idea of not wanting to over-disclose. There's no need to continually remind your employer that you have MS. They may already know, but if they don't know in particular, why keep mentioning that? The reason that you need to go to the doctor could be a checkup, could be a dentist appointment, whatever it might be. And you want to take that time off as part of the existing benefit that you have through your employer. You don't want to take time off for a doctor's visit as an accommodation, or you don't want to take time off from the Family and Medical Leave Act time unless it requires extensive time off. But for outpatient appointments that regularly occur, take all of your regular leave that anyone else would get, and don't ever attribute it to your MS unless you have to for one reason or another. It's not that you're wanting to hide your MS. It's just you're under no obligation to keep reminding your employer that you have it, if that makes any sense at all. It's a great question. Both are. And be happy to talk with you more like.
The questions are great and your answers are so detailed, Phil. Thank you so much. You're really giving great information. So Kelly says that she's having cognitive issues, depression and anxiety, as well as fatigue. Let's see, I have been placed into a fast-paced department and cannot keep up. My employer flatly refused an accommodation request to lighten my workload. What are my rights?
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear this one, Kelly, and employers have a difficult time generally accommodating cognitive limitations, often because when you're experiencing cognitive problems, you often don't know what exactly, you can't quite put your finger on it. It's a memory problem, but it's not always the case. You can compensate for it in various ways. And the mental health concerns as well, that combination, employers have a hard time knowing what to do with regard to that. If the employer is flatly refusing the accommodations that you are requesting, before I would go to the point of a formal complaint, because then you've really fractured the bond between you and the employer. I usually try to encourage folks to think about, so you made a request for an accommodation, they said no. Before we go to the next step, are there other accommodations that are different? So if they're just saying, I'm not accommodating you at all, that's really not okay. And at that point, we may want to look at what the next steps would be. If they said, we're not doing this accommodation that you've requested, which is usually what happens, and we think about some other accommodations that they might view as more reasonable that would still allow you to continue in your work, and start by asking them about that. So you say, I asked for this one accommodation. You said you wouldn't do it. I have some other ideas. Would you be willing to engage me in this conversation? But if you're feeling, Kelly, like they're placing you in a high-stress environment to make it more difficult for you and perhaps retaliating against you because this is going on. I'm not assuming that that's the case, but I'm wondering if that's part of the case and they're starting to kind of pile things on to make it worse for you. We have a term we call in labor relations called constructive discharge. And this is creating an environment. You're not firing the person, but you're creating an environment that makes them want to quit. And that is not legal under the ADA, but it's a hard thing to document and it's a hard thing to prove. So when the first response to accommodation is no, I like to go back with other solutions and strategies, and I'd be glad to help in identifying some of those. When it becomes a hard no, and the employer is being what you feel is unreasonable, perhaps singling you out with these decisions. For example, if they're accommodating other people in various ways, but saying no to you, that's when we want to start thinking about what your recourse is, both internally within the employer organization and perhaps externally. That would be the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But you make a formal complaint against your employer really as a last resort. We always try to work these things out before it gets to that. Not that you have to fold your tent and back down. It's just once it gets to that point, the relationship with the employer is really over. And at that point, it's really only a matter of time before a new job is required. The other thing is we can start talking about if it's not working there in that situation, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't in another setting, and looking for other jobs, particularly in this economy where there's a lot of open positions. You're not consigned to staying at a job that's not working for you, because there could be opportunities at another place that would be more accommodating. I'm rambling a bit, but Kelly, I'd be glad to talk with you as well if you would like to.
Very good. Chris has a question. He said, when applying for jobs, do I have to declare MS as a disability, even though my symptoms are very mild?
Chris, if your symptoms are very mild, and here's the key: if they do not you got to think about the duties of the job you're thinking about, and if your symptoms do not necessitate an accommodation for that job you're applying for, you have absolutely no obligation to disclose your MS or your disability status, and those are two different things. You could say I'm a person with a disability without saying that you have MS. You don't have to disclose your diagnosis in the vast majority of cases. But if your symptoms do not require an accommodation for that job you're seeking, there is no obligation to tell them that you have MS or disability. And I would say there's no reason to tell them, right? And why would you? If you have a circumstance in your life that is unrelated to your ability to do the job, let's say that you are divorced, or your religious persuasion, or your credit score, right? If those things have nothing to do with your ability to do the job, and your MS, if it doesn't currently, your MS status is not their business until it has the potential to affect your job performance. So I'm saying it this strongly because there's a tendency among people with disabilities to over-disclose their disability status. And I think you can let that information out in the way you want to. And once you've said it, once you say I have MS, you can never get your privacy back. The employer, really always knows that. And there are some risks associated with it. So until you have to disclose, we usually suggest that you don't. And the standard is, do you need an accommodation related to whatever you're going to disclose? And if the answer is no, then we would emphatically say, then probably not at this particular time. I have never once talked to a person with MS who said, I wish I'd have told my, I'll just say this. I've never talked with a person with MS who has said, I wish I told my employer more about my MS than I did. A lot of folks have said, I wish I didn't tell them as much as I did. And I think that's really telling, is that there is a tendency to want to be honest, to want to be straightforward, but you have to balance that with your right to privacy, and don't share information you don't want to, or information that is as a matter of law, none of their business with them until there's a need to do that. So that's a great question, Chris, and I'm sure many other folks are wrestling with that as well. So I really appreciate you bringing that up for the good of the order.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. And that does bring us to the end of this event. I can't thank you enough for staying a bit longer with us. If anybody's missed any part of this, it has been recorded and it will be available through the MS Focus Facebook and YouTube channels. Please reply to your registration email for more information about that. By participating in a short survey that we send to you right after the webinar, you'd really be helping us learn the type of information most helpful to you and the attendees. We really want to make sure that everything is meaningful to you. Please join us for our next webinar on Wednesday, April 2nd at 3:30 p.m. And MS certified nurse Sherry Binns is going to be presenting her bi-monthly Q&A, which we call Ask the MS Nurse. For 1 full hour, Sherry is going to attempt to answer all of your MS symptom management questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, especially Phil, for educating us on this great, important topic. Once again, we'd like to thank our wonderful sponsors, Genentech, Novartis, EMD Serono, and Sanofi. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and thanks again, Phil, so much.